Here's a test almost nobody passes. Picture two bank statements laid side by side, names blacked out. Statement 1, $41 sitting in checking, a maxed-out credit card, and a driveway with a truck payment due Friday. Statement 2, $28,000 sitting in checking, zero debt, and a retirement account that quietly crossed $2 million sometime last year. Now, guess which one belongs to the person who just posted a photo from a beach resort. You will get this wrong almost every time, and that failure rate is not an accident. It is the entire design of how money actually behaves once it becomes real. Somewhere in the next few minutes, you are going to learn how to read a person the way an accountant reads a ledger instead of the way a stranger reads an outfit. And once that switch flips in your head, it does not flip back. Start with the number that makes this whole test so unfair. Close to 24 million people in the United States currently qualify as millionaires, and that population is growing by more than 1,000 new members every single day. Flip that statistic around and something strange happens. Roughly 1 out of every 15 adults sitting in a waiting room, standing in a checkout line, or parked next to you at a gas station is quietly carrying 7 figures. The catch is that almost none of them look the part, because looking the part was never the goal. The goal was always the opposite of visibility. Decades of research on this exact population keeps landing on the same conclusion, and it has a name: the next-door millionaire. Not a celebrity, not an heir, not a lottery winner. A guy who owns 3 dry cleaning locations. A woman who spent 31 years running a school cafeteria. A couple who has quietly rented out the same duplex since 1994. They arrived at 7 figures on completely unremarkable incomes, using a short list of habits repeated so many times they stopped feeling like discipline and started feeling like just how life works. What follows is that list, reorganized around the idea that actually explains all of it. Here is the idea. Income is a number that shows up once and disappears. Wealth is a number that survives. The gap between the two is simply what a person refuses to spend, left alone long enough to multiply. An anesthesiologist billing $500,000 a year and spending all of it has a big number that vanishes monthly. A city inspector earning a fraction of that, who routes a fixed slice of every check somewhere it cannot be touched, ends up owning the future the anesthesiologist only rents. Every visible marker you have been trained to associate with money, the car, the watch, the renovation, is actually a measurement of the first number, not the second, which is exactly why it lies to you so reliably. The asset shield, how they treat cars and homes as tools, not trophies. Group these two together because they run on the identical piece of psychology. Both a car and a house are the two purchases capable of quietly erasing decades of saved money if a person lets ego make the decision instead of arithmetic. On the car side, dealerships are currently moving new vehicles for an average price that recently broke $50,000 for the first time in history, financed at monthly payments regularly exceeding $770. People signing those loans are frequently stretching them past 7 years, which is another way of saying they will still owe money on a car that has been dead for a decade. Contrast that with a widely cited pattern among self-made millionaires. Their car purchases typically total only about 1% of their entire net worth. On a $2 million portfolio, that is a $20,000 vehicle, usually bought with the depreciation already absorbed by someone else, often kept running for 8 or 10 years past the point where a status-conscious buyer would have traded it in. The exact same math governs the house, only the numbers get bigger and the mistake gets harder to undo once a 30-year mortgage is attached to it. One of the most famous examples of this instinct belongs to an investor who has lived in the same modest house he bought in 1958 for roughly $31,500. Despite being able to buy nearly any property on the planet several times over. The pattern holds at ordinary income levels too. A retired mechanic with a 7-figure account almost never lives in the biggest house on the block, because every additional bedroom is a recurring bill against a future that has not happened yet. More square footage to heat, more property tax due every year regardless of income. More furniture filling rooms nobody actually walks into. Buy the car and the house that do the job, not the ones that make a statement. And an enormous portion of the entire wealth gap disappears before a person ever opens an investment account. Quick question before we keep going. Which of these habits has surprised you the most so far? Drop it in the comments below, because the next few are even less intuitive than what you just heard. They know their real number, and almost nobody else does. This one rarely makes these lists, and it should be near the top. Ask an average adult what their net worth is, and you will usually get a guess, a shrug, or a wildly wrong figure in either direction. Ask someone who is genuinely wealthy the same question, and the answer often arrives instantly, to the thousand, because they check it. Not obsessively, but regularly, the way a pilot checks instruments before ever leaving the ground. A former logistics manager named Desmond tracks his number every single month in a plain spreadsheet nobody else has ever seen, updating 4 or 5 figures and letting the total recalculate itself in under 2 minutes. And that 15-minute ritual has quietly outperformed every budgeting app his coworkers have tried and abandoned within a few weeks. Knowing the number does something psychological that spreadsheets rarely get credit for. It turns an abstract goal like save more into a concrete target like I need this account to hit this figure by this date. And concrete targets get hit far more often than vague intentions ever do. There is a second, quieter benefit too. A person who checks the number regularly catches small problems while they are still small. A subscription that crept back in, a balance drifting the wrong direction, long before those problems have time to compound into anything serious. Clothing and accessories tell you nothing, on purpose. Genuinely wealthy people are difficult to read visually because they have deliberately stopped using their bodies as advertising space. The logo is gone. The watch, if it exists at all, is chosen for reliability rather than recognition. Clothes get worn for years and replaced only once they are actually finished, not once a new version launches. The louder a person's visible spending gets, the more likely you are watching someone still trying to convince a room, or convince themselves, of a status they have not fully secured. Data on luxury purchases backs this up consistently. The heaviest spenders on visibly branded goods tend to be middle earners reaching upward, while the truly affluent shop for comfort and durability and could not care less whether a stranger clocks the price. There is a term for this now, stealth wealth, and it has become the dominant aesthetic among people who actually have the money, precisely because a loud logo has started reading as a quiet admission of insecurity. Silence is the default setting whenever money enters a conversation. Watch a group of friends at dinner and notice who cannot help narrating the cost of everything: the flight, the renovation, the bonus. Genuinely wealthy people rarely play that role, and it is not humility so much as strategy. Announcing numbers invites comparison, requests, and resentment, none of which benefits a person who already has what they need. A retired transit worker named Gabriel spent 32 years driving the same city route and now owns 2 rental properties nobody in his social circle knows exist. Ask him what he does, and he says, "I'm retired." Full stop, no elaboration. He drives the least expensive car on his own street, splits every bill evenly without comment, and lets every conversation about money pass by him like weather. People who talk about money loudly are frequently still climbing toward a number. The ones who quietly own the number tend to stop mentioning it, because there is nothing left to prove to the table. Money is only invisible because it is always in motion. This is the mechanism that makes every other habit on this list actually work. The genuinely wealthy route the bulk of their income into places that never show up at a dinner party, and they refill those places automatically, year after year, without deciding to each time. Current contribution rules make the ceiling higher than most people realize. Over $24,000 allowed into a workplace retirement account this year, several thousand more into an individual account, and if eligible, a few thousand into a health savings account that offers a rare triple tax advantage: a deduction going in, tax-free growth, and tax-free withdrawals for medical costs. Stack an employer match on top, and the total tax-advantaged room stretches into the tens of thousands annually, most of which the average worker never comes close to filling. Here is the part almost nobody copies. Once those accounts fill, the wealthy keep going into a completely ordinary taxable account, buying broad index funds on a schedule and simply leaving them alone for years at a stretch. None of this requires willpower, because none of it happens by choice each month. The money leaves the paycheck automatically, gets invested the same day, and is never seen long enough to be missed. A support technician named Naomi set this up once, years ago, adjusted it twice for raises, and has not thought about it since. Her co-workers assume her modest apartment reflects a modest financial situation. Her brokerage balance says otherwise, entirely because she automated the one decision that actually mattered and then got out of her own way completely. Debt gets treated as an enemy, not a tool for keeping up appearances. Total credit card debt in America currently sits above $1.2 trillion, with average interest on carried balances hovering near 22%, a rate that roughly doubles the true cost of anything left unpaid for about 3 years. Roughly 6 in 10 cardholders carry a balance month to month, which means a majority of the country is quietly paying that surcharge for the right to have already spent money it did not have. A warehouse operations lead named Ilias uses a rewards card constantly, for groceries, gas, everything, purely for the cash back, and then erases the balance in full before a single day of interest can accrue. He paid cash for his car years ago and has not made a car payment since. Debt that costs more than his investments earn gets destroyed immediately. A cheap, fixed-rate mortgage locked in years ago gets left exactly where it is because that debt is working in his favor, not against him. The result is someone who owes almost nothing and therefore answers to almost nobody, a form of freedom that rarely photographs well, but shows up instantly in how relaxed a person looks when an unexpected bill lands on the table. They quietly protect the downside before anyone asks them to. This is the habit almost nobody notices because it only becomes visible during a crisis, which is exactly when it matters most. A dental office manager named Farah spends a small, boring amount every month on adequate insurance, an updated will, and a beneficiary list that actually reflects her current life instead of one drafted a decade ago and never revisited. None of that is exciting. None of it gets mentioned at parties, and no one has ever complimented her on it the way they might compliment a new kitchen. But when her sister was hospitalized unexpectedly last year, Farah's family finances did not buckle because the protection had already been built quietly into the structure years before the emergency ever arrived, sitting there, unused and unnoticed until the exact moment it was needed. Most households skip this step entirely, treating insurance as an expense to minimize rather than a wall built before the storm, and treating estate paperwork as a task for some vague future date that never quite arrives. The genuinely wealthy tend to treat it the opposite way, as one of the cheapest insurance policies against total financial collapse that exists, and they buy it long before they think they will ever need it, precisely because by the time you know you need it, it is usually too late to buy it at all. An unexpected bill barely raises their pulse. Watch how someone reacts when a transmission dies, a pipe bursts, or a job disappears without warning, because financial stress functions like a truth serum. Most households treat any one of these as a crisis, partly because the national personal savings rate sits near a thin 4% of income, leaving almost no cushion for anything unplanned. The genuinely wealthy absorb the exact same news with an almost unsettling calm, built from a specific, boring mechanical choice, keeping months of expenses parked in a high-yield savings account earning close to 4% right now, rather than the traditional account most people default to, which nationally averages around 1/3 of 1%, with some legacy banks paying next to nothing at all. Run the numbers on an identical $20,000 balance and the gap becomes almost comedic. In a competitive high-yield account, that money earns roughly $800 a year while its owner sleeps. At the national average, it earns about $76. At one of the laziest big banks, it earns enough for a single cheap sandwich. Two people can hold the exact same balance and end the year in entirely different financial universes, purely based on which account the money happened to sit inside. They buy the excellent version once and stop shopping entirely. There is a spending pattern among wealthy people that looks, at first glance, like spending more rather than less. They pay real money up front for well-made boots, solid furniture, appliances built to last. But they then keep that item for a decade or more, while a person chasing the appearance of style churns through 3 cheap replacements in the same window and ends up spending more in total while owning less. A property manager named Renata bought one excellent winter coat 16 years ago and still wears it every season. The fabric has faded, and a stranger might assume she cannot afford a new one. In reality, she has spent less on outerwear across 16 years than a coworker spends in 3, because that coworker replaces a trendy jacket annually, while Renata simply bought the thing built to last and stopped looking. The instinct extends to everything they own. Repair first, replace only when repair genuinely fails, and keep a mechanic or a tailor on speed dial instead of a return receipt. They have made complete peace with the word no, and lifestyle creep has almost no grip on them. Watch who can decline a destination trip, an upgraded phone, or a group dinner they cannot justify without a shred of guilt. And you are watching someone who has already internalized that most social spending is optional. This matters most when income rises, because lifestyle creep, the automatic upgrade of every expense the moment a raise lands, is the single most reliable wealth killer among high earners. A claims adjuster named Theo received a meaningful raise 2 years ago and changed nothing measurable about his daily life. Same apartment, same aging sedan, same weekend routine. The entire raise now routes directly into investments before he ever sees the extra money land in checking. To friends who upgraded the instant their own incomes grew, Theo looks almost stubbornly frugal. What they are missing is that he spends freely, without hesitation, on the 2 or 3 things he actually values, and says no to nearly everything else without a second thought. Eventually, they simply stop performing wealth altogether, because the performance was always a stand-in for something they no longer need to fake. All the energy other people spend looking successful gets redirected into things that never make it into a photo. Flexibility, the ability to leave a bad job without panic, the option to help a struggling relative quietly, an ordinary Tuesday spent exactly as they choose without asking anyone's permission first. That is the actual product real wealth was always building toward, not a louder car or a shinier wrist, but the freedom to stop keeping score in public. A person who has genuinely arrived there tends to look at the entire status competition and feel no pull toward it whatsoever, which is precisely why they end up looking so unremarkable in the first place. They are not losing. They are finished proving anything to anyone, and that particular kind of quiet is something no amount of spending has ever managed to buy. So go back to that blind test from the very beginning, the 2 bank statements with the names blacked out. You already know which one belongs to the person posting beach resort photos and which one belongs to the person who looked like they were barely getting by. The unsettling part is not that you got it wrong. It is realizing how confidently you would have gotten it wrong again tomorrow, in a real parking lot, with a real person, if nobody had ever pointed out what you were actually supposed to be looking for. The whole system depends on that confidence. Every industry built around visible spending needs you to keep mistaking the loud number for the real one, because the moment enough people stop making that mistake, the entire performance stops paying for itself. There is one layer underneath everything you just read, and it deserves a final second of attention. Every habit on this list, the asset shield, the automated accounts, the calm during a crisis, the comfortable no, rests on one advantage nobody is handed at birth: an actual working understanding of how money moves. Nobody in this list inherited a secret manual. Most of them simply learned, somewhere along the way, the mechanics a classroom never got around to covering. How debt compounds against a person while investing compounds for them. How a credit score gets built. Why a boring tax-advantaged account outperforms a checking account over any real stretch of time. And how to build a system that makes the smart decision automatic, so willpower never has to carry the weight alone on a hard day. That foundation is the real starting point behind every sign you just learned to spot. and understanding it properly is worth more than any single habit on its own, because habits without the underlying logic tend to fall apart the first time life gets complicated, while the logic itself keeps working no matter what gets thrown at it. If this changed how you'll look at the next parking lot, the next dinner table, the next fresh pair of sneakers, hit subscribe, because we break down exactly how this quiet money system actually gets built, one account and one habit at a time, every single week. And if you want the full walkthrough on where to start, the next video in this series picks up exactly where this one leaves off.